The hallway was filled with the usual noise of a busy school morning. Lockers slammed, laughter echoed, and the sound of sneakers squeaked against the polished floor. Students were rushing to get to their classes before the bell rang, some in groups, some walking alone with their backpacks hanging loosely from their shoulders. Among them was a girl moving carefully in her wheelchair. She had gotten used to the busy hallways and the rush of students brushing past her without slowing down. She had learned to keep her hands steady on the wheels, guiding herself so she wouldn't bump into anyone. Her eyes stayed low, not because she was shy, but because she had learned that sometimes it was easier not to notice the way people stared. She carried her books stacked neatly on her lap, trying to balance them as she moved toward her classroom. That morning, like so many others, she reminded herself just to focus on reaching her desk on time. She never liked drawing attention to herself. But sometimes, no matter how quiet she stayed, the world found ways to notice her, and not in the kind way she hoped. A group of students standing by the lockers watched her as she passed. They weren't the kind who cared about how others felt. They were the kind who laughed at the smallest thing and turned other people's struggles into jokes. One of them whispered something, and the others laughed. The girl in the wheelchair pretended not to hear, but their voices carried easily. "Look at her. She thinks she's in some kind of race," one of them said, smirking. Another joined in. "Careful, don't roll too fast. You might crash into the wall." The group burst out laughing. The girl's face tightened, but she kept moving. She told herself, just like she always did, that if she ignored them, they would get bored and stop. But that day, they weren't satisfied with just words. As she rolled past them, one of the boys stepped slightly forward, pretending as though he was adjusting his backpack. His foot brushed against the wheel just enough to slow her down. She tried to steady the books on her lap, but one slipped and fell to the floor. Before she could reach for it, another hand suddenly pushed against the back of her chair. The motion was sharp, unexpected. Her wheelchair tipped forward, the books flying in every direction. She cried out as she fell to the ground, the metal frame of the chair clattering against the tiles. The sound echoed through the hallway, and for a split second, everything seemed to pause. Then came the laughter. The bullies clutched their sides, pointing at her as though it were the funniest thing they had seen all week. "Oops! Looks like the wheels came off," one of them shouted. The girl lay on the ground, her hands trembling as she tried to push herself up. Her heart pounded in her chest, and for a moment she didn't even know what to do. She wanted to disappear, to vanish into the floor so no one would see her like this. Around her, students had stopped to look. Some whispered, some gasped, but most just stood frozen, unsure if they should step in or stay quiet. No one moved to help. The bullies walked away laughing, high-fiving each other as though they had just done something worth celebrating. The girl finally managed to sit upright, her wheelchair tipped over beside her, her books scattered across the floor like broken pieces of her morning. She reached for one of them, her hand shaking, but it slipped from her grasp. Tears stung her eyes, but she tried hard not to cry in front of everyone. The silence of the other students cut deeper than the laughter of the bullies. She could feel their eyes on her, the way they pitied her, the way they didn't know what to say. Some turned away quickly, pretending not to see. Others just watched, frozen in place, as though helping was too much of a risk. For the girl on the floor, that moment felt longer than it really was. Seconds stretched like hours. She wondered why no one cared enough to step forward. Was she really that invisible? Was her pain something people could just ignore? She finally pulled one of the books into her lap, trying to gather herself. Her arms ached from the fall, and her pride felt even more bruised than her body. She hated how weak she must have looked to everyone else, and yet, in the middle of that crowded hallway, there was someone watching with a very different expression. A black girl stood a few feet away, her hands gripping the straps of her backpack tightly. Her eyes weren't filled with pity. They were filled with fire. She had seen the whole thing from the start. The cruel jokes, the deliberate shove, and the humiliating fall. And while everyone else stayed frozen in silence, something inside her refused to do the same. Her heart raced, not just from anger, but from the weight of the moment. She remembered times when she had been treated unfairly, when people had made her feel small for no reason other than cruelty. She remarked. The rest of the morning moved on as if nothing had happened. But inside the black girl's heart, everything felt different. She couldn't shake off the image of the wheelchair falling to the ground and the cruel laughter that followed. It replayed in her mind like an echo she couldn't turn off. She sat in class, pretending to listen to the teacher, but her thoughts drifted back to the hallway. Every time she remembered how everyone stood frozen, doing nothing, a wave of frustration rose inside her. The girl in the wheelchair had quietly made her way into class as well. She didn't look at anyone, didn't speak, and kept her eyes fixed on her notebook as though the pages were safer than the stares of her classmates. Her hands shook slightly as she wrote, and though she tried to appear calm, it was easy to see the pain in the way her shoulders curled inward, as though she was trying to make herself smaller, invisible. At lunch, the cafeteria buzzed with the usual noise, students laughing, trading snacks, and filling the air with chatter. But for the girl in the wheelchair, the noise felt heavy. She rolled herself into a quiet corner, away from the crowded tables, and began unpacking her lunch. She didn't look up, not even once. The black girl noticed. She was sitting with a few classmates, but her eyes kept wandering to that lonely corner. She saw the way the wheelchair girl picked at her food, not really eating, just pushing it around with her fork. It hurt to see her sitting there alone, carrying the weight of what had happened that morning. She excused herself from her table and walked over. For a moment she hesitated, wondering if she might make the girl uncomfortable by sitting with her. But then she remembered the way she had whispered thank you in the hallway, how her eyes had shown both gratitude and fear. That was enough reason to sit down. "Mind if I join you?" she asked softly, placing her tray down before waiting for an answer. The wheelchair girl looked up, surprised. For a second, her lips parted as though she didn't know what to say. Then she gave a small nod. The black girl sat down across from her, offering a gentle smile. For a while, they ate in silence. It wasn't the heavy kind of silence. It was quiet but strangely comforting. Finally, the black girl spoke. "I saw what happened this morning. I just want you to know, what they did was not okay, and it's not your fault." The wheelchair girl paused, her fork still in her hand. She lowered her eyes and let out a shaky breath. "It happens a lot," she said quietly. "Not always like that, but people make jokes, or act like I'm in the way. I'm used to it." Her voice was soft, but the words stung. "Used to it?" the black girl repeated, her eyebrows pulling together. "You shouldn't have to get used to people treating you like that." The wheelchair girl gave a small shrug. "It's easier to just ignore it. If I fight back, it only gets worse." The black girl leaned forward, her tone steady but warm. "But ignoring it doesn't make it right. And what they did this morning, that was cruel. No one deserves that. Not you. Not anyone." For a long moment, the wheelchair girl didn't respond. Her eyes glistened slightly, and she quickly blinked them clear. "Thank you for helping me," she whispered again. "If you hadn't come, I don't know what I would have done." The black girl smiled gently. "You don't have to thank me. You deserve kindness. Everyone does." The two girls continued their lunch, slowly growing more comfortable with each other. The black girl told small stories, light-hearted things from class, or funny little moments that had nothing to do with the morning. She did it on purpose, trying to lift the mood, to remind the wheelchair girl that life wasn't just about pain. Slowly, a smile appeared on the wheelchair girl's face. It was small, but it was real, and for the black girl, that was enough. But even as they shared that quiet moment, the bullies weren't far away. Across the cafeteria, the same group that had pushed the chair laughed loudly at their table. Every so often, one of them would glance over, whisper something, and the others would burst into giggles. It was clear they hadn't learned anything. The black girl noticed. Her jaw tightened, but she forced herself to stay calm. This wasn't the place to confront them. Not yet. Later that day, when classes ended and the hallways were quieter, she spotted two of the bullies by the lockers. They didn't see her at first, too busy bragging about their joke, from the morning. Did you see her face when she fell? One of them laughed. I swear, I thought I was going to die from laughing. The other snorted. Man, that was too easy. She's like a toy, you just push and watch what happens. Their laughter rang out again, sharp and cruel. The black girl felt her blood boil. She wanted to storm up to them, to shout, to make them understand how wrong they were. But she stopped herself. The morning air at school felt heavier than usual. Students moved through the hallways like nothing had changed. But for the black girl, every step carried a purpose. She had made a decision. She was not going to stay silent anymore. The memory of the wheelchair girl falling, the cruel laughter, and the way everyone had looked away was carved into her mind. She couldn't erase it, and maybe she wasn't supposed to. Maybe that memory was what she needed to keep her going. When she walked into class, her eyes automatically searched for the wheelchair girl. She was sitting near the back, as she always did, notebook open and pen in hand. From the outside, she looked calm, but her posture told a different story. Her shoulders were hunched forward, as though she was bracing herself for something that hadn't even happened yet. The black girl gave her a reassuring smile as she passed by. It was a small gesture, but it mattered. The wheelchair girl looked up, and for the briefest second, her lips curved into a smile too. It was faint, but it was there. All through class, the black girl's mind wasn't on the lesson. She was watching the way the bullies acted. They sat together in the middle row, leaning back in their chairs, whispering and snickering at things no one else found funny. From time to time, one of them would glance over at the wheelchair girl, smirk, and then nudge the other. It was subtle enough that the teacher didn't notice, but it was loud enough in its meaning. They weren't done. They had no intention of stopping. By lunchtime, the black girl had already decided she needed to talk to someone, not just the wheelchair girl, but other students. She couldn't be the only one who cared, right? There had to be others who felt just as uneasy about what had happened, even if they had stayed quiet at the time. She started small. In the cafeteria line, she turned to a boy who had been in the hallway during the incident. You saw what happened yesterday, didn't you? She asked. The boy looked uncomfortable immediately, shifting his weight and avoiding her eyes. Yeah, I saw. And? She pressed gently. Didn't it bother you? He shrugged. Of course it did. But what was I supposed to do? If I had said something, they would have come after me too. Better to just stay out of it. She shook her head slowly. That's what they count on, that everyone will stay out of it. That's how they keep winning. The boy didn't respond, and when his food tray was filled, he walked away quickly, almost like he couldn't handle the conversation. The black girl sighed. It wasn't the answer she wanted, but she didn't let it discourage her. She tried again, approaching a group of girls who were laughing over their sandwiches. Hey, she said. Yesterday when those boys pushed the chair, didn't that make you angry? The girls grew quiet for a moment. One of them finally spoke. It was awful. I felt sick watching it. So why didn't you say anything? The black girl asked. The girl looked down at her sandwich. Because they scare me. They're mean, and they don't care who they hurt. If they decided to turn on me, I wouldn't stand a chance. The black girl listened carefully. She understood the fear. They were bullies for a reason. But she also knew fear couldn't be the final answer. By the time lunch ended, she realized the truth. People did care. They weren't heartless, but fear had a strong grip on them, stronger than their courage. She knew then that if something was going to change, it couldn't just be about words. It had to be about action. Action strong enough to show others that standing up wasn't impossible. That afternoon, in the quiet library, she found the wheelchair girl sitting alone by a window, flipping through a book. She sat down across from her without asking, and the wheelchair girl looked up, surprised, but not unhappy. I've been talking to people, the black girl said softly. They care about what happened, but they're too afraid to act. The wheelchair girl lowered her eyes. That's normal. People don't want trouble. I don't blame them. But that's the problem, the black girl said firmly. Everyone is waiting for someone else to be brave. But if no one does anything, the bullies win every time. The wheelchair girl let out a long sigh. I don't think anyone can stop them. They've been like this for years. Teachers talk to them, but nothing changes. They laugh about it later. The black girl leaned closer. Maybe it's not about waiting for the teachers. Maybe it's about us. About showing them that they can't control everything. About proving that they're not as powerful as they think. The wheelchair girl looked at her with a mix of admiration and fear. You really think we can change things? Yes, the black girl said simply, without hesitation. But only if we're willing to try. For a moment, they sat in silence, the sunlight from the window spilling across the table. Then, slowly, the wee-ow. The next morning at school, the atmosphere was tense. Everyone had seen what happened in the gym. For the first time, someone had stood up to the bullies and stopped them in their tracks. The story spread quickly through whispered conversations in the hallways. Some students told it like it was unbelievable. Others told it with excitement, as though it was the most heroic thing they had ever witnessed. Either way, the effect was the same. People were finally talking. The black girl noticed the way eyes followed her as she walked to her locker. Some students nodded slightly, as if showing respect. Others just stared, curious about what she would do next. She wasn't used to the attention, but she didn't let it bother her. She hadn't done what she did to be noticed. She had done it because it was right. Still, she couldn't deny that something had changed. The bullies noticed it too. Their usual swagger seemed a little forced. They still laughed loudly, still shoved their way down the hallway, but there was a shadow of uncertainty in their movements now. They had been challenged, and everyone knew it. For the first time, their power didn't feel untouchable. At lunch, the black girl sat with the wheelchair girl. They ate quietly for a while until the wheelchair girl spoke. You know they're going to come back, right? They won't just let this go. I know, the black girl said calmly. But this time we won't be alone. People saw what happened. Some of them are already realizing that standing up is possible. The wheelchair girl glanced around the cafeteria. It was true. Students who normally ignored her were giving her small smiles, even waves. A few even came by their table to ask how she was doing. That had never happened before. It feels different, the wheelchair girl admitted softly. For once, I don't feel invisible. That's because you're not invisible, the black girl replied firmly. They just made you feel like you were. But now they can't anymore. Later that day, the bullies made their move. It happened outside, near the back of the school building where fewer teachers passed by. The black girl was walking with the wheelchair girl when the group suddenly appeared, blocking their path. Their leader stepped forward, his grin sharp and mocking. So you think you're a hero now? He said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. You embarrassed us in front of everyone yesterday. Do you really think we're going to let that slide? The black girl stood tall, her eyes never leaving his. You had no right to treat her the way you did. Everyone saw it. Everyone knows what you are now. He laughed, but there was a flicker of unease in his eyes. What I am, I'm the one who runs this school, and anyone who thinks they can challenge me finds out fast what happens next. The other bullies closed in, but before they could do anything, voices rang out from behind. Leave them alone. The black girl turned slightly, surprised. A small group of students had gathered nearby. They weren't hiding this time. They were watching openly, and some of them looked ready to step in if things got worse. The leader of the bullies glanced at the growing crowd. His grin faltered for a second. He hadn't expected this. He was used to silence, to people looking away. Now they were staring right at him, and the pressure was building. The black girl's voice was steady as she spoke again. You don't scare us anymore. People are tired of your games. You've been doing this for too long, and it ends now. The leader sneered, but he didn't move closer. He looked around at the crowd, then back at her. For the first time, the balance of power had shifted. He realized that if he tried something here, it wouldn't just be her he was facing. It would be everyone watching. He shoved his hands into his pockets and muttered something under his breath before walking away, his friends following reluctantly behind him. Their retreat wasn't graceful. It was filled with muttering and scowls, but it was a retreat all the same. The students who had gathered let out a collective sigh. Some clapped quietly, others smiled. A boy in the crowd called out, "That was amazing!" The black girl glanced at the wheelchair girl, who was smiling so widely that her eyes were shining. For the first time in a long time, she felt safe. She felt seen. As the crowd dispersed, the wheelchair girl whispered, "You changed everything today." "No," the black girl said softly. "We did." The next few days were different at school. The bullies still existed, but their laughter seemed less confident. They didn't approach the wheelchair girl anymore, and though they still tried to act tough, the spell of fear they had cast over everyone seemed to be breaking. Students who had been silent before started to speak up more. When someone tried to make a cruel joke, others told them to stop. When a student dropped their books, more people bent down to help. The atmosphere was shift. The weeks that followed brought a quiet but powerful change to the school. It wasn't something that happened all at once, but little by little, the difference could be felt everywhere. The hallways didn't feel as heavy with tension anymore. The cafeteria, once divided into groups that rarely mixed, started to feel more open. And most importantly, the wheelchair girl was no longer sitting alone. She would wheel into class with a smile now, because she knew she had people who cared about her. Some students greeted her warmly, asking if she wanted help with her bag or offering to save her a spot. She didn't always say yes. She wanted to keep her independence. But the fact that people were offering it all meant the world to her. It was a kindness she had gone years without. The black girl watched all of this with quiet pride. She didn't take credit for what had happened. She never once said, "I did this." Instead, she encouraged others to see their own strength. When someone spoke up against a rude comment, she praised them. When a group of students included someone who usually sat alone, she smiled and reminded them how good it felt to make someone feel seen. She became like a steady force, always present, guiding without demanding attention. But she also knew the story wasn't over. The bullies hadn't disappeared. They still roamed the hallways, still tried to crack jokes at others' expense. Yet their voices seemed weaker now. Their laughter didn't carry the same power it once had, because people no longer joined in. More often than not, their cruelty was met with silence, or worse, with people calling them out. One afternoon, the wheelchair girl and the black girl were sitting under a tree outside after school. The air was warm, and the sound of students laughing in the distance carried across the yard. The wheelchair girl looked thoughtful, as if something had been on her mind for days. "Can I tell you something?" she asked quietly. "Of course," the black girl replied. "You changed my life," the wheelchair girl said. Her voice trembled, but she held the words steady. "Before that day, I used to cry at night. I used to ask myself why I even bothered to come to school when it felt like nobody cared. I thought I would spend the rest of my life being invisible, being treated like I didn't belong. But then you stood up for me, and everything changed." The black girl shook her head softly. "It wasn't just me. You've always been stronger than you realized. You survived all those years of them being cruel, and you never gave up. That's strength, too." Tears filled the wheelchair girl's eyes, but she smiled. "Maybe, but you showed me that I don't have to do it alone anymore. That's what I'll never forget." In the distance, the bullies passed by. They glanced toward the two girls under the tree but didn't come closer. They kept walking, their shoulders tense, their expressions unreadable. For once, their presence didn't feel threatening. It felt small, almost powerless. Not long after, something happened that sealed the shift completely. During a school assembly, one of the teachers invited students to share stories about courage and kindness. At first, the room was quiet. Students shifted uncomfortably, waiting for someone brave enough to speak. Then, to everyone's surprise, The wheelchair girl raised her hand. Slowly, she wheeled herself to the front of the auditorium. The entire school watched as she took the microphone. Her voice was nervous at first, but it grew stronger with every word. She spoke about what it felt like to be pushed aside, to feel invisible. She spoke about the pain of being laughed at and how hard it was to pretend she didn't care. Then she told them about the moment everything changed, when someone stood up for her instead of looking away. "You may not realize it," she said, her eyes scanning the room, "but small acts of courage change lives. When someone speaks up, it gives hope to people who feel like they don't matter. It tells them they're not alone, and once you feel that hope, you can never forget it." By the time she finished, the room was silent. Not the uncomfortable kind of silence, but the heavy kind that meant people were truly listening. Then, slowly, the silence turned into applause. At first, it was just a few claps, but then it grew louder and louder until the entire auditorium was on its feet. The black girl clapped the hardest. Her heart swelled with pride as she watched her friend shine. In that moment, it was clear. The wheelchair girl was no longer a victim. She had found her voice, and she was using it to change the world around her. After the assembly, dozens of students came up to the wheelchair girl to thank her. Some admitted they had been too scared to speak out before. Others said her story gave them courage. Even a few who had laughed along with the bullies in the past apologized, their faces red with shame. That day marked a turning point. The school